Recording Children's Online Privacy Protection Act out of the privacy section of the regulatory guide, reference guide to regulatory compliance on paper page 879 of the old text. Congress enacted the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act in 1998 to prohibit unfair or deceptive acts or practices in the collection and use and or disclosure of personal information from and about children on the internet. The act provides privacy protections for children and specifically requires operators of websites directed to children to provide notice to and obtain consent from parents before collecting data from their children. In November of 1999, the Federal Trade Commission issued regulations to implement this law. Because the law specifically applies to banks that operate websites directed to children, the OCC wrote examination procedures in 2002. See OCC Bulletin 2002-31 to assess compliance with the law. The rules apply to all banks, however, no other agency has written examination procedures. Coverage, subsection 1A. Children under the age of 13 years are protected by this regulation. B. Persons subject to the regulation include those who operate an internet website or an online service for a commercial purpose involving interstate commerce or protections with one or more foreign nations, and those who collect or maintain personal information from or about the visitors to the website or on whose behalf such information is collected or maintained. Collect or collected means the gathering of any personal information from a child by any means, including requesting that children submit personal information online, enabling children to make personal information publicly available, and the passive tracking or use of any identifying code linked to an individual. Covered websites. Internet websites or online services are covered if they are commercial sites, including those offering products or services for sale, and B, they are targeted to children. 2. Commercial internet websites or online services will not be covered solely because they refer or link to a commercial website or online service directed to children by using information location tools including directory, index, pointer, hypertext, link, reference. 3. When determining when a website is targeted to children, the Federal Trade Commission will consider subject matter, visual or audio content, age of models, language or other characteristics of the website or online service, whether advertising directed at children appears on the website, and empirical evidence regarding audience composition, evidence regarding intended audience, and whether a site uses animated characters and or a child-oriented activities or incentives. D. Personal information covered includes first and last name, home or other physical address, including street name and name of a city or town, an email address or other online identifiers such as instant messaging, user identifier, or a screen name that reveals the email address, telephone number, social security number, persistent identifiers such as a customer ID number held in an internet cookie or processor serial number where the identifier is associated with other information such that the combination permits physical or online contacting. 7. Information concerning the child or the parents of that child that the operator collects online from the child and combines with an identifier described in this definition. Subpart 2, requirements for website operators. An operator of an internet website or online service directed at children or with actual knowledge that it is collecting information from children must provide notice on the website or online service of what information it collects from children, how it uses such information, and its disclosure practices for the information. 2. Obtain verifiable parental consent for any collection, use, or disclosure of personal information from children. 3. Provide a reasonable means for the parent to review information collected and to refuse to permit its further use. 4. 4, not condition a child's participation in a game or similar activity on the child disclosing more personal information than necessary to participate in the activity. 5, establish and maintain reasonable procedures to protect the confidentiality, security, and integrity of personal information collected from children. B, under requirements for website operators, is mechanisms for obtaining parental consent. Any method to obtain verifiable parental consent must be reasonably calculated in light of available technology to ensure that a person providing consent is the child's parent. Methods include providing a consent form to be signed and returned by mail or facsimile, requiring a parent to use a credit card in connection with the transaction, having a parent call a toll-free telephone number staffed by trained personnel, and D, using a digital certificate that uses public key technology. E, using email accompanied by a PIN or password obtained through one of the other verifiable methods listed. 3, interim method of verifying consent. Until April 21st of 2005, methods to obtain verifiable parental consent may include the use of email coupled with other steps to provide assurances that the person providing the consent is the parent. When using these methods, the operator must notify the parent that earlier emailed consents may be revoked. Additional steps may include sending a confirmatory email to the parent after receipt of consent, 2, obtaining a postal address or telephone number from the parent and confirming the parent's consent by letter or telephone call. B, however, this method is verifying consent may not be used for the following disclosures. Roman numeral 1, release of personal information for any purposes except where an operator provides the information to a person who provides support for the internal operations of the website or online service and who does not disclose or use the information for any other purpose. And 2, Roman numeral 2, making personal information collected by a child publicly available in identifiable form by any means, including public posting through the internet, personal homepage posted on the website, a pen pal service, an email service, a message board, or a chat room. Letter C under requirements for website operators is exceptions to parental consent. Prior parental consent is not required when the operator collects the name or online account information of a parent or child to be used for the sole purpose of obtaining parental consent or sending a required notice to the parent. 2, when the operator collects online contact information from a child for the sole purpose of responding directly on a one-time basis to a specific request from the child, and the information is not used to recontact the child and is deleted by the operator from its records. 3, where the operator collects online contact information from a child to be used to respond directly more than once to a specific request from the child, and where such information is not used for any other purpose. The operator must make reasonable efforts to ensure that a parent receives notice and has the opportunity to request that the operator make no further use of the information immediately after the initial response and before making any additional response to the child. 4, where the operator collects a child's name and online contact information to the extent reasonably necessary to protect the safety of a child, participant on the website or online service, and the information is used solely for the purpose of protecting the child's safety, not used to recontact the child or for any other purpose. C, not disclosed on a website or online service. In such case, the operator must make reasonable efforts to provide a notice to the parent. 5, where the operator collects a child's name and online contact information, and such information is not used for any other purpose to the extent necessary to protect the security or integrity of the website or online service, take precautions against liability, respond to judicial process, and provide information to law enforcement agencies or for investigation related to public safety, provided the disclosure permitted by other provisions of law. Required notices. General rule. All notices required under sections 312.3 and 312.5 must be clearly and understandably written, be complete, and must contain no unrelated, confusing, or contradictory materials. Notice on website. The link to the notice that is required to be on the website or online service must be on the home page and at each area on the website or online service where personal information is collected from children. The operator of a general audience website or online service must post a link to a notice of its information practices on the homepage of the children's area only. Link. C, and this is requirements for notices. Link. The link to the notice must be clearly labeled as information practices regarding children. 2, the link must be placed in a clear and prominent place and manner on the homepage. And 3, the link must be placed in a clear and prominent place and manner at each area where children directly provide or are asked to provide personal information and in proximity to the request for information. D, content of notice on website or online service. The notice must state 1 through 6 the name, address, telephone number, and email address of all operators collecting or maintaining personal information from children. 2, the types of personal information collected from children and where the personal information is collected, actively or passively. 3, how such personal information is or may be used by the operator, including fulfillment of a requested transaction, record keeping, marketing back to a child, making it public available through a chat room or by other means. 4, whether personal information is disclosed to third parties, and if so, the types of business in which such parties are engaged, the general purposes for which information is used, or the third party have agreed to maintain the confidentiality, security, and integrity of the personal information they obtain, and that the parent has the option to consent to the collection and use of their child's personal information without consenting to the disclosure of the information to third parties. 5, that the operator is prohibited from conditioning a child's participation in an activity on the child's disclosing more personal information than is reasonably necessary to provide. And 6, that the parent can review and have deleted the child's personal information and refuse to permit further collection or use of the child's information and state the procedures for doing so. E, the notice to parents. Under the requirements for notices, an operator must make reasonable efforts to ensure that a child's parent receives notice of the operator's practices with regard to its collection, use, and or disclosure of the child's personal information, including notice of any material change in the collection, use, and or disclosure practices to which the parent has previously consented. And letter F under requirements for notices is the content of notice to parents. The notice to the parents must state that the operator wishes to collect personal information from the child. The items required to be in the website notice listed in D above. C3, that verifiable parental consent is required for the collection, use, and or disclosure of the information. And 4, the means by which the parent can give the consent. Subpart 4, parents' right to review personal information of a child. At the request of a parent whose child has provided personal information, the operator must provide 1, a description of the specific types or categories of personal information collected from the children by the operator, including, if applicable, name, address, telephone number, email address, hobbies, or extracurricular activities. 2, the opportunity to refuse to permit the operator's further use or future online collection of personal information from that child and require the operator to delete the child's personal information. 3, a means of reviewing any personal information collected from the child. The operator must, in order to carry out this requirement, ensure that the requester is a parent of the child, and B, not be unduly burdensome to the parent. Letter B, under parents' right to review personal information of a child, an operator may terminate any service provided to a child whose parent has refused to permit the operator's further use or collection of personal information from his or her child, or has directed the operator to delete the child's personal information. Other requirements, subpart 5, an operator may not condition a child's participation in a game, the offering of a prize, or another activity on the child's disclosing more personal information than is reasonably necessary to participate in such activity. And B, operators must establish and maintain reasonable procedures to protect the confidentiality, security, and integrity of personal information collected from children. Subpart 6, safe harbor. Operators will be deemed in compliance with these regulations if they comply with self-regulatory guidelines issued by representatives of the marketing or online industries that are approved with the FTC. Such guidelines must include a requirement that operators implement substantially similar measures that provide the same or greater protection for children as required by this Act. B, an effective mandatory mechanism for the independent assessment of subject operators' compliance with the guidelines. This standard may be met by periodic reviews of the operator's information practices conducted on a random basis, either by the industry group or by an independent entity. 2, periodic reviews of all operators' information practices conducted by the industry group or by an independent entity. 3, seeding of subject operators' databases if accompanied by either type of periodic review or any other equally effective independent assessment mechanism. C. Effective incentives for subject operators' compliance with the guidelines. This requirement may be met by 1. Mandatory public reporting of disciplinary action taken against operators by the industry group. 2. Consumer redress. 3. Voluntary payments to the U.S. Treasury in connection with an industry-directed program for violators. 4. Referral to the FTC of operators who engage in a pattern of practice or of violating the guidelines or any other effective incentive. And Roman numeral 7, record keeping. Industry groups and others seeking safe harbor must keep the following items for 3 years. Consumer complaints alleging violations of the guidelines against subject operators. B. Records of disciplinary actions taken against subject operators. And C. Results of the independent assessments of subject operators. Subpart 8. OCC examination procedures. The OCC examination procedures have the following objectives. A. Determine whether the bank has established appropriate policies to ensure compliance with COPPA. B. Determine whether the bank has established effective processes to ensure compliance with COPPA policies and processes. Determine whether the bank's management and personnel possess sufficient knowledge and technical skills to manage and perform duties related to COPPA. D. Determine the reliance that can be placed on the bank's control systems to detect and correct COPPA violations. E. Determine the bank's level of compliance with COPPA. And enforcement. Actual damages available under the FTC Act. Enforcement authority vested in the bank regulatory agencies when banks are operators of websites or online services. Fear of penalties are $7,500 per day for violations of laws and regulations. $37,500 per day violations or unsafe or unsound practices or engaged in recklessly or are part of a pattern of misconduct that causes more than a minimal loss to the bank or pecuniary gain to the parties involved, and penalties up to $1,375,000 per day against persons who knowingly commit a violation or knowingly or recklessly cause a substantial loss to the bank or a substantial benefit to the party.